Hi, my name is Lucy Huxley. I'm a whore, and welcome to my bedroom. I'm so happy to be back. I have missed the last couple episodes because I was very sick. So, my apologies to my avid listeners who have been upset about the lack of episodes, but I am doing better now and getting back on track. So, thank you for bearing with me. Today's episode is all about kink and BDSM. I kind of have a lot to say about this topic. I'm going to discuss my experiences in kink and BDSM, which are quite long and varied. I think they're interesting. We'll see if you agree. And also just my opinion on some things within BDSM and kind of an overall discussion of it. I also set up a question box on my Instagram, which you saw if you are following me at Lucy Huxley X. And I was originally going to do the answers to your guys' questions at the end of this episode, which is what I usually do. I usually answer questions at the end, but there were so many questions and so many good ones that if I put my answers at the end of this episode, I think the episode would end up being like 2.5 hours long. So I decided to do that in a separate episode. And this way, you guys will also get a bonus episode to miss up for the ones that I missed the last couple weeks. So keep an eye out for the question and answer episode. I'm thinking about releasing it on Wednesday or Thursday, but don't hold me to that. I will definitely update on Instagram about when I am going to share that episode, and that will be coming. Let's dive in. BDSM, if you didn't know, is an acronym that stands for bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadism and masochism. So the D and the S both have two meanings. So BDSM is really a catch all term that encompasses everything that can fall underneath those 6 words. And it's kind of a catch all term to refer to any type of really kinky sex, any type of sex or sexual play that involves power exchange. I'm not going to get into like the definition of kink because then you can also get into like what is kink versus fetish. And I know there's a lot of different opinions on that. And I feel like that could be a whole episode in itself. I know people have differing opinions on what the definition of kink is, but I guess really what I'm going to be talking about in this episode is sexual practices that include power exchange and really deviant, quote unquote, sexual practices. So, how did I get into BDSM? Because I was a bit of a late bloomer in this regard. I mean, I don't think I was particularly late. I do know that some people discover that they're kinky when they're quite young, like it's kind of a part of their sexual awakening when they're children or teenagers. For me, I got into it a bit later when I was in my early 20s. So, when I started having sex, I remember I used to fantasize about things like being held down by my boyfriend, like just by my arms. I really enjoyed being spanked. But I didn't really know why I fantasized about or enjoyed those things. I didn't know what BDSM was. I didn't have the context to really explore my desires or to use any particular terms around them. It was all kind of like a gray area for me that I just didn't even have the context or the language to even fully flesh out within myself, like within my own mind. And when I was 19, I think, yeah, I was 19 and I moved to Berlin. I started dating my first boyfriend in Berlin. And right off the bat, when we met, he told me that he was really into BDSM and he was really kinky. He was dominant, he was a Dom. And I was like, well, I've never tried anything like that. I have no experience, but I will try anything once. That's generally my attitude in life, especially when it comes to sex. Like, I'll try anything once, like, let's do it. Let's find out if I like it or not. So I told him that, I was like, I'm up for experimenting, but, I can't guarantee if I'm going to like it or not. And when we started dating, we started experimenting. I think the second time we slept together, he texted me before I came to our date and he said, if you want me to tie you up tonight, go to the hardware store and get some rope, and then I will. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. I was pretty excited, but also a little bit nervous for sure. But I did it. I went and brought the rope and he tied me up with it, like very basic. He was just tying my arms to the bedpost or something, there was no crazy shibari happening or anything like that. And I really, really enjoyed it. And it made me super excited to explore more things. And so from that point on with this boyfriend, we kind of just kept on trying new things. And basically every new thing that we tried, I loved. And I started getting really into it. Like when I start getting into a topic or a hobby, I will like fully nerd out about it. So that's what I did with BDSM. I started doing a ton of research into BDSM, like what are the best practices for it, how to be safe, and what are the possibilities of what we can play with here, getting ideas for what we can do with research. I'm going to make an aside here about best practices for BDSM and how important doing your research is because most things within BDSM are way more intense than regular sex and have so much more risk associated with them. So it's really important that you take this stuff seriously and that you use safety precautions. Things even as simple as choking, which is really not a simple thing, have really high risks. That's one of my pet peeves actually about like current society is that choking is just seen as this like normal thing that so many people enjoy. And it's great that so many people are into it. But choking can be incredibly dangerous if done incorrectly. You can actually accidentally collapse someone's windpipe and send them to the hospital. And most people don't know this and don't know how to choke properly and choke safely. I'm not going to give you guys a choking tutorial on the podcast, but if choking is something you're into and you're not aware of the best choking practices, please do some research and learn about that. And this doesn't only apply to choking, this really applies to any sort of physical play that is at that level. In the BDSM community, I don't know if I want to use the word we here, actually. I don't know if I consider myself an active member of the BDSM community, but I guess I am. I don't know. In the BDSM community, we use the acronym RAC, which stands for Risk Aware Consensual Kink. When I started doing BDSM, the predecessor to this, which is SCC, was more widely used. SCC stands for Safe, or sorry, it's SSC, not SCC. SSC stands for Safe, Sane, Consensual. And this was an acronym that was widely used in the BDSM community. And it basically meant that any type of BDSM or kinky play that you do should be safe, it should be sane, and it should be consensual, which is a good guideline. However, there are some issues with this because saying that something is safe or unsafe creates a false dichotomy. Most BDSM play is inherently risky. You can't say that it's 100% safe. There are risks associated with a lot of things. And then we also have a similar issue with using the term sane because, what does sane mean? So you're saying that someone is either in a sane state of mind or is not. But where do you draw the line when you're playing with somebody who has mental health issues, like many people do? If you're struggling with depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, any of those sorts of things, that has an impact on your sex life and on your play. And if we say that all BDSM play has to be sane in order to be good, then what are we saying about people with mental health issues? It again just creates this false dichotomy. And that's why the kink community kind of moved away from using that acronym and moved towards using RAC, which stands for Risk Aware Consensual Kink. I think this is much better because it's risk aware, like it's not saying it's safe or unsafe, but being aware of the risks in everything you do. Because as I said, with so many things in BDSM, they have risks and you need to be aware of them and aware how to best mitigate those risks, but you can't mitigate 100% of the risks. Consensual, of course, consent is super important. This should go without saying, but it does have to be said. Consent is an integral part of BDSM. It's super necessary for anything that you do within this space. And then kink, risk-aware consensual kink. That's what we're doing. There are a lot of good resources for BDSM and kink. You can do research online and find resources for yourself. There's actually a lot of social media creators on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube who make really good content about this type of stuff. Personally, I recommend a series of books by Dossie Easton and Janet Hardy. They have two books called The New Topping Book and The New Bottoming Book. These books are my Bible. When I started getting into BDSM, I read both of these books, even though I was only interested in being submissive at the time. I think I've read both of them at least twice. I highly, highly recommend these books to anybody who's interested in starting to incorporate power exchange into their sexual life and anyone who's interested in any type of kink or BDSM. Again, they're called the New Topping Book and the New Bottoming Book. And they really just give a beautiful overview about being dominant or being submissive or being a top or being a bottom, whatever terms you want to use. And they use a lot of real life examples from their lives and from the lives of their friends to really illustrate the importance of playing safely and also illustrate the beautiful things that can come out of doing this type of play. They also have another book called Radical Ecstasy that I also really love. That's really about the spirituality of BDSM. I know that this book is a little bit too woo-woo for some people because it is, yeah, pretty esoteric and spiritual, but I'm quite a spiritual person myself. I think a lot of people who play with BDSM understand that there is kind of this inexplainable level of spirituality to BDSM, you know? The type of intimacy that you get from this type of play is really deep and really powerful and can really take you places. It can really be amazing. So, circling back to my experiences with this boyfriend of mine, we just kept on experimenting with things and going further and further. One thing that he had told me he was really into was knife play. And knife play is, you know, exactly that. It's playing with knives. Knife play does not mean that you are cutting somebody's skin or that there's blood involved at all. That's a separate thing. That would be like blood play or, you know, making incisions. Knife play is really just playing with knives. So the first time him and I did it, I think he used like actually a butter knife that he had put in the fridge because when it's been put in the fridge, the cold sensation kind of makes things more intense. When you're doing knife play, you really shouldn't be using a really sharp blade because it's easy to accidentally cut someone. You should be using a dull blade, and you can put it in the fridge to make it cold to make the sensation more intense. If you are actually intending on cutting somebody's skin, that's a completely different thing. I'm going to talk about that shortly, actually. But yeah, we tried knife play, and I fucking loved it. I really wasn't sure if I would like it when we did it, but kind of like with everything that me and this boyfriend tried, I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to like it, but let's try it. And then we did it. And I was like, wow, that was fucking awesome. I just love the intensity and the thrill of him having this power, you know, I'm putting power in quotation marks because, you know, it's not like he was actually going to slit my throat or anything. But imagining him having this power over me was really thrilling to me. And I really, really loved it. We did actually kind of go to the next level from that and do blood play. I'm going to speak about blood now for a few minutes. So if you are averse to that, skip forward. But this was actually kind of a turning point in our relationship in a negative way, actually. So we had discussed doing blood play for a while because it was kind of like the next step of things. You know, we had done knife play, we had done bondage, we had done a lot of like power exchange and verbal stuff, and we both wanted to try blood play. So we did a lot of research on it. You know, this boyfriend of mine took this safety stuff very seriously, and we bought some razor blades, disposable razor blades to do it with because you need to be using a blade that is very sharp and you need to be using a blade that is disposable for hygiene. We bought disinfectant. He was practicing using the razor blades on oranges to get a feel for the pressure he needed to use. If you are interested in doing blood play, please do your own research on this. I'm not sharing this information as like a guide. I'm just telling you guys what we did. This was like, what, 8 years ago, 9 years ago? And so one day we went for it and we did the blood play. He made an incision on one of my breasts. I don't remember which one. And it wasn't a super deep incision. He only got a little bit of blood out, nothing major. And I remember as he was cutting me, as he was doing this to me, I realized that I did not fully trust him. And I realize this because of the amount of intense trust that this play requires. You know, when someone is literally cutting your skin open, you need to trust them. And I was obviously giving him a lot of trust by allowing him to do that. But as he was doing that to me, I kind of got scared that he would go further without my consent, which he didn't do. You know, nothing bad happened. But in that moment, I realized that I didn't trust him at the level that I wanted to. I wish I could say that I broke up with him right after that, but that is not what happened. It was quite a few more months until I broke up with him. But you know, if you are practicing BDSM yourself, you know that trust is super important. And if you ever have a moment like that where you feel like you don't trust someone, it's better just to walk away. It is so, so crucial to trust the people that you're doing this type of stuff with. Another thing that I got into while I was with this boyfriend was DDLG, which stands for Daddy Dom, Little Girl. A more general term to refer to this type of play is just DDL, so like a Daddy Dom Little. But there's obviously all sorts of terms you can use within this. And it basically just refers to the dominant role playing as a parental figure. And it usually involves age play. So the submissive person, me, role playing as a younger age than they actually are. I actually really debated about if I was going to talk about this on the podcast or not, because this is actually like a really sensitive and vulnerable thing for me to share. Like, I have a hard time telling my own sexual partners that I'm into DDLG. Like, with my last boyfriend, I think I actually didn't tell him about it until we were dating for like 6 months. So I debated if I wanted to, share this on a podcast that like over 1,000 people would listen to. Because I still don't tell people in my personal life about it, but it's easier for me to share it publicly for some reason than it is to share it with somebody I'm intimate with. So here we go. I'm sharing it with you. And also, I kind of want to practice what I preach, because I don't think that people should be ashamed around any kinks that they have. And I actually do have some shame surrounding this kink of mine, which is one of the reasons why I feel so vulnerable and scared to share it. But, when I think about it objectively, I don't judge people for any kinks or desires that they have. I might judge people if they enact those kinks and desires in an unsafe or an unethical way. But I would never judge someone just for having desires, right? So why do I judge myself for having these desires? Easier said than done to not judge oneself. But yeah, DDLG has always been a big kink of mine. It is like inherently an emotional thing for me. And I think that's also one of the reasons why I don't like sharing about it. And I'm scared people will judge me for it, because it is so inherently emotional and it's so easy to misunderstand, because it has nothing to do with incest. It has nothing to do with me like wanting an actual sexual relationship with my father. It has nothing to do with pedophilia. That's also a common misconception with age play. A lot of people think that anyone who is into age play, they're connecting that with pedophilia. And it's really a completely separate thing. And this kind of leads into the topic of like, what are kinks and why do we desire them, and how our fantasies differ from reality, right? Because I have this kink of wanting to pretend to be a little girl and like a father figure is having sex with me, but that's obviously not something I want in real life on any level. I don't want to be younger than I actually am. But this can be applied to so many things within kink. Like, I also have experience with sadism and I enjoy hurting men in the bedroom, but that doesn't mean I want to just like go around hurting men in real life. The things that we do in a controlled fantasy environment, like within BDSM, are completely different than the things that we actually want to experience in real life. And the fantasy part of it is part of the appeal, that as adults, we can create this fantasy scenario that is so far removed from the reality of what we are role playing as. I hope this makes sense. I guess what I'm trying to say is what I'm into with DDLG is kind of creating this power dynamic as an adult and pretending to be in these roles. The books I mentioned by Dossie Easton and Janet Hardy do such a good job of explaining this type of thing. So I really recommend reading those if this is a topic you're interested in, the whole topic of fantasy versus reality and why we have the desire to create certain fantasies. So I got really into DDLG with this ex of mine. He was my daddy Dom. And this was really one of the things that was initiated by me. I kind of discovered DDLG by doing a lot of research into BDSM myself and kind of realized it was something that I was really interested in, and that the DDLG dynamic really fit with desires that I was already experiencing. Like, I wanted my boyfriend as my dom to be very caring and almost in a parental role, as opposed to just being like a cold sadist. So with this dynamic, him and I actually entered into a 24/7 relationship. A 24/7 BDSM relationship is kind of exactly what it sounds like. It means that you are in your BDSM roles 24/7. It doesn't necessarily have to be 24/7, not every single hour of every day, but it really just refers to taking these power dynamics out of being solely in the bedroom and bringing them into your daily life. And this can mean a whole variety of things. It can be something very simple, like wearing a necklace that is your symbolic collar and referring to your partner with honorifics like sir or daddy or master, and maybe having like certain rituals you do throughout the day. Or it can be a total power exchange. That's what we call 24/7 TPE relationship, when there is total power exchange 24/7, meaning that the person who's in the dominant position in the relationship has control over almost every aspect of the submissive's lives. And this can mean things like financial control. It can mean things like controlling when the other person goes to the bathroom, controlling when they eat, controlling when they go out, controlling what they wear, almost anything you can imagine. This relationship was not TPE. It was not a total power exchange. I had a choker that I would wear every day that was my collar to symbolize that I was owned by him. We were in an open relationship, but I always had to ask him for permission to orgasm with other people. I think we also had like a ritual where I would like pray to him on my knees before I went to bed. Just little things like that, casual. And I really enjoyed it, but we only did 24/7, I think, for a couple of months, and then I found out that he was cheating on me and we broke up. But I did really enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy being submissive in general, because you can probably assume from what I've been talking about. But I did really enjoy being submissive, every single day, even when we weren't together, because of this power exchange. I was always wearing a collar that reminded me that I was his. I was always communicating with him in a way that reminded me that I was submissive within the bounds of our relationship, obviously. This is also something that we really discussed really thoroughly before we entered into, and we really tried to be aware of the implications of the power dynamic that we were bringing into our relationship. But like I said, the 24/7 dynamic only lasted for a few months, and then we broke up. After this guy and I broke up, I actually went through a really interesting change in my desires around BDSM. So let me tell you the full story. So I think it was actually like a week after I broke up with him, I went with some friends to a music festival in Bulgaria, I think it was. I was there with 3 friends, 2 guys and a girl. Both of the guys I had been sleeping with, like casually dating. And we were at this music festival in the mountains. It was so, so beautiful. And it was Sunday morning, and I had taken 2CB, which, if you don't know, is a mild psychedelic. I really love it. I think it's fantastic. And I was walking at the top of this mountain during sunrise, and there was like mist, on the valleys below. It was so, so beautiful. I was tripping. I was having the time of my life. And I just remember having this moment at the top of the mountain where I felt so powerful. And I had kind of this realization that I was the queen of my own life. I'm laughing because it sounds kind of cheesy to say, but that's what I was feeling. I was like, I am the queen of my own life. Like, I have power in my own life. And after this moment, I stopped wanting to be submissive at all during sex, which was crazy to me because I had been at a point where I could not orgasm without thinking about loss of power. And, I mentioned how BDSM was kind of like a new thing for me. I hadn't always been into it sexually, but I had always associated orgasming with loss of power. And this is because I actually lost my virginity by being raped. And the first year or so of my sexual experience was in a very abusive, like non-consensual relationship. So that was my introduction to having sex was, 100% a loss of power. I had no power or no agency in that situation. And obviously that affected my sexuality. So, when I started getting into BDSM, it was kind of an avenue for me to safely explore this loss of power that was so intrinsically tied into my sexuality. And then I had this turning point when I was tripping on 2CB and felt like I was coming back into my own power. I remember having sex with one of those guys like the day after, and I was like, I don't want you to choke me. Which was crazy coming from me. I was like, it just doesn't feel right. Like, I don't want to do it. And that led me down a really interesting path because, like I said, I completely lost interest in being submissive. And that was really the core of my sexual identity and of my sexual experiences. All the people that I was sleeping with at the time knew me as someone who enjoyed being submissive. And then I was like, actually, I don't want that. So I became interested in either only having sex without a power exchange or in being dominant. The interesting exception to this was that I was still into DDLG. At the time, I was incredibly selective about which partners I practiced DDLG with. I wasn't just like going around saying daddy to everyone I slept with. Like for me, it was a very deep and emotional thing. So I would only do a DDLG dynamic with someone that I was in a committed relationship with. So a while after this, I got another boyfriend, and him and I would either have vanilla sex with no power exchange or we would do DDLG. He was not interested in really being submissive, so I didn't practice anything dominant with him. But while I was in a relationship with this guy, I also had another friends with benefits because this relationship was non-monogamous. We were polyamorous. And I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about this friends with benefits because I still look back on my relationship with this man as one of the best, if not the best, sexual relationship I've had in my life. We're going to call him Sam. That's not his real name. But me and Sam were friends with benefits for almost 4 years, which is crazy. That's actually longer than any romantic relationship I've had in my life. And it was always like very chill. We would see each other like once a month, have amazing, mind-blowing sex. Neither of us really ever needed or wanted anything more than that. But the reason I'm bringing him up now is because I actually rediscovered being submissive with Sam. So, as I said, at the time I felt pretty uncomfortable being submissive. I just had no desire to do it at all. But after seeing Sam for a while, I started to kind of have an interest in exploring it with him. And this is because Sam made me feel so, so safe. He was always so present and so in tune with me in a way that, in my experience, is very, very rare to find. Like, there's only been a few guys I've ever slept with who have been so in tune with me and so present. Like, most of the times when me and Sam were having sex, I would never even need to say anything verbally because if I wasn't really into something or if I wanted him to do something more, he could just tell, like, from my body language and from the way I was reacting. I never had to say anything. We were so in sync with each other. Having sex with him felt like such a beautiful and effortless dance. It was just so easy. We used to joke that like we were an experiment put on this earth by aliens to see how sexually compatible two people could be. Because like the physical compatibility and the chemistry was just like off the charts. He made me feel so safe and so secure, and I trusted him so much. And he did this by, like I said, being present and being in tune and by always prioritizing my pleasure and my comfort. That's what he was into, was making sure that I felt good and that I felt taken care of. I'm getting emotional just talking about it because this was really like such a special connection to me. So yeah, I started exploring being submissive with him. And, it wasn't anything crazy. We weren't doing like blood play or knife play or anything like that, but just exploring giving my power to him. And I enjoyed it because I started to understand being submissive in BDSM as a choice. Because, like I said before, this type of submission was so built into my sexuality because of the negative experiences I had had that it just felt like being submissive and my sexuality were like intertwined, without my consent. And like I said, I associated having an orgasm with a complete loss of power. And I realized that being submissive is not a loss of power. It's about choosing to give your power to someone, which is a different thing. It's important to make that distinction. So I was able to explore being submissive by choosing to give my power to somebody that I trusted very, very deeply. And getting to experience it from this new perspective was so enjoyable and so exciting. And for almost a year, the only person that I was submissive with was Sam, because he was the only person I trusted to that level and the only person that I really felt comfortable with and had the desire to be submissive to. And like I said, him and I were friends with benefits for like 4 years, but there was a year gap within that where he went traveling with his girlfriend. And yeah, at the end of those 4 years, he became monogamous with his then fiance, now wife. So that's why our relationship ended. And that was actually really hard for me because, we were only friends with benefits. So when things ended with him, I was like, oh, it's just, we're just friends with benefits. Like, it's just a person I won't be having sex with anymore. But it actually really deeply affected me because, I think as you can tell from what I've said about him, it was an incredibly meaningful relationship for me. And like I said, one of the best sexual relationships I've ever had in my life. It really wasn't just about the sex, Obviously, the sex was the main thing about our relationship. We would meet up and hang out, but we were meeting up to have sex. But the sex was so deeply intimate and so deeply fulfilling. Like, I think I said to him when our relationship ended, actually, that, like, I had tried to brush it off as just sex, but actually, sex can be and was with us so deep and so important and so meaningful. Like, this man really did change my life. So, thank you to Sam if you're listening to this. I miss you. So, backtracking a little bit to while I was seeing Sam, I really had a desire to explore my dominant side because, when I went through this change of not really being submissive anymore, I had an interest in being dominant for the first time in my life. Beforehand, it was really something that didn't interest me at all. And now, with my newfound power, as I'll say, I guess, I wanted to explore being dominant in a BDSM scenario. And it took me quite a while to find a guy that I liked who was interested in being submissive. If you're a woman who's dominant and has tried to find a submissive male partner, you know how hard it is, okay? It is not common to find submissive men. So it took me quite a while, but I did eventually meet one of my now exes. I'm going to call him Marcus. That's not his real name. But the night I met Marcus, I thought he was super cute. And then I found out that he had experience being submissive and he actually had experience being a slave in a 24/7 BDSM dynamic with his ex girlfriend. And I was like, yeah, this is my man. So him and I started dating almost right after that. We got into a relationship pretty quickly. We were non monogamous. This was really the beginning and really the bulk of me exploring my dominant side. We pretty quickly fell into what we called the master pet dynamic. I enjoyed using the term master over mistress because master felt like it had a lot more power within it to me, and I enjoyed kind of the gender subjugation. And Marcus was my pet. He was my kitten specifically. So we had a owner pet dynamic or master pet dynamic. So this was quite a caring BDSM power exchange. As my pet, I took care of him. And practically, this looked like him wearing a collar. He would usually wear a collar with a lock that I had the key to. I actually used to wear the key on a necklace. We actually got him like kitten ears that matched his hair and like a fluffy kitten tail. I still smile remembering how cute he looked in that. We also got him like a pet food bowl to eat out of on the ground, things like this. So this did kind of pretty quickly evolve into a 24/7 relationship because the things I'm talking about here, being locked in a collar, all this stuff, that was things that we were doing outside of just the bedroom. We weren't doing these things only when we were having sex. We were doing them kind of throughout our daily life. And it was really enjoyable to both of us. I mean, there's a lot of pitfalls just 24/7. We had a lot of issues in our relationship in general, and I'm not going to like dive into that because I feel like it's not so relevant. But I really loved getting to explore this dominant role. And this really was a big time of sexual exploration and excitement for me because I got to explore all of these things on the dominant side. I discovered that I was actually a really big sadist, which was helped along by the fact that Marcus was a massive masochist. I have never met another person who is as kinky as Marcus, still to this day. I do not know someone else who is at his level. Like, I used to get surprised that his neighbors would not call the cops when we were playing because the way I was making this man scream, not like screaming like sexual pleasure, but like screaming like he was being tortured because he essentially was. I mean, that's what he enjoyed. I enjoyed doing it to him as well. I would do things like, use a TENS machine, which is an electricity machine. It can actually be used in physiotherapy, or it can be used in BDSM to give electrical pain. I would use a TENS machine on him. I would use a Wartenberg wheel, which are those like little stainless steel wheels with really sharp spikes on them. I would use those to actually like break his skin and bring out blood. I would hit him with floggers and whips and canes to the point of bruising. I'm trying to think of what else we did. I think those are all kind of like the extreme things that would make him scream. But then there was also a really tender side to it of like, you know, he would just be lying in my lap and I would be petting his hair because he was my little pet. That was kind of the more daily side of it, was this really tender side. One thing that really surprised me about being dominant in this way is how safe and cared for I felt in this relationship. I also felt really powerful, which I really enjoyed. And I guess I expected that more. I expected to feel powerful when being dominant. But it was kind of unexpected to me to feel this really high level of safety and care from my submissive partner. Because we were exploring these extremes together, you know, these extreme sides of ourselves that aren't really necessarily welcome in daily life. I can't go around whipping men and causing them to bleed in my daily life. He can't go around, you know, like asking people to hold his leash or like getting on his knees in daily life. You know, we were bringing out these sides of ourselves that are not necessarily welcome in daily life and being vulnerable with them to each other and trusting each other with those sides of ourselves. It just made me feel very connected to him and very safe with him. In this dynamic, as his dominant, it's my role to take care of him and to provide for him. But I also felt taken care of in the other way. I felt taken care of by him as well. And it was just a really beautiful and enjoyable thing to experience. I loved being in that dynamic with him so much. It didn't last very long because, like I said, we had a lot of issues with our relationship. Doing a 24/7 relationship like that really kind of puts your relationship on steroids. So anything negative about your relationship is going to be amplified, and also anything positive about your relationship is going to be amplified. So, you know, all of the communication issues we had, all of the general issues we had in our relationship were really amplified by doing this 24/7 power exchange. And in the end, we couldn't keep it up for very long. And we broke up like just around a year after we started dating, I think. I will also say that actually Marcus was the first person, I think, after Sam, who I was submissive with. So Marcus and I would actually switch sometimes. So I would say to him, like, oh, you know, I would like to switch today. Like, can you dominate me? And especially towards the end of our relationship, we actually switched to him dominating me more often than the other way around. That relationship with Marcus was really the bulk of my experience being dominant. There's a couple other people that I did light play with as a dominant, but nothing really on that level since then. After that relationship ended, because of the way it ended and because of the things we went through, I felt a lot of guilt that, you know, I hadn't been able to do the right things as a dominant. Looking back, I don't think I did anything catastrophically wrong, but, you know, I was like 21 years old and we didn't have the best communication. And I put a lot of blame on myself for the way that our relationship ended, especially the power exchange side of it. And after that, I felt really scared to be dominant again because I was scared to mess up. And also, by the time our relationship ended, I really had renewed my interest in being submissive. And that was kind of more what I was interested in exploring after that. So, after that relationship, I had a period of about 3 years where I was single and I was dating around. And I always remember this period as my period of teaching men how to be kinky. Because during this time, I was still super kinky and super interested in being submissive. And, you know, as anyone who has tried to find a BDSM partner knows, it is not always easy. So, what I would do is just find guys that I liked and kind of try to teach them to be kinky. I got so good at teaching guys how to choke me. Like, I have the whole fucking script down, you know? After we've had sex, we're lying in bed. I'll be like, hey, can I teach you how to choke properly? And they'll be like, yeah. And then I'll get on top of them and I'll demonstrate by choking them and I'll explain it to them, you know, you got to do it like this and not like this. And then be like, okay, like now you try on me. I still get very excited to this day when I sleep with a guy for the first time and I tell him to choke me and he knows how to do it properly and safely. It gets me so excited and so happy. I'm like, yes, I don't have to teach you how to do this. I can just relax. You know what you're doing. And yeah, during this time, some guys that I dated did know how to be kinky. You know, they did have experience. I didn't have to explain too much. Some of them were total beginners that I really had to, kind of show and like handhold through. I used to actually keep extra copies of the New Topping book by Dossie Easton and Janet Hardy that I mentioned earlier. I used to keep extra copies of that to give to men that I was dating to be like, hey, can you please read this book? And at the time, I was actually still really into knife play. And I had this really beautiful dagger that one of my exes had given me. It was a replica of a World War II Fairbairn Sykes dagger. Super beautiful with like a golden handle. And I used to keep it on display on my bookshelf. And then sometimes when guys come over, I would ask them to hold it against my throat while we were having sex, which definitely spooked some men. I did not always have success with asking guys to do that to me. A lot of them got a little bit freaked out, like, you want me to do what? You want me to hold what against your neck? Like, oh my God, no, that's too much. But yeah, I was mostly single until 2021 when I met my most recent ex. I'm not going to go too much into this relationship on this episode because I have spoken about it both in episode 1 and episode 4, I believe. So if you want to know more about my journey with kink throughout that relationship, go listen to those episodes if you haven't already. But basically, with this most recent ex, the sex we had was very vanilla. Not necessarily because he didn't want to try kink, but also just because of the emotional space I was in at the time. And after him and I broke up last August, I kind of rediscovered my kinky side. And again, I talk about this in detail in episode 1. So since last August, I've kind of been rediscovering my kinky side and rediscovering what I am into and what I'm into now. Because another thing that I find so interesting about kink and BDSM is how fluid it is. The things I am into now are not the same things that I was into when I first discovered BDSM when I was 20. So I'm actually going to give you guys a nice overview of what I am into these days. So I also want to make a disclaimer that what I'm into in my personal life is different than what I do for work. So if you're a client of mine or a potential future client of mine who's listening to this episode, the list of things I am into that I am about to talk about is not the list of things that I do during bookings with clients. I'm going to talk more about this in the end about like why I have this separation and what I do with clients versus what I don't do. But just a disclaimer so that you don't think of this as a list of what we can do together, okay? So somebody asked in my question and answer box, which, like I said, I'm going to answer all those questions in the next episode, but just because I feel like this one is relevant, somebody asked me to share my BDSM test results because there's a website called BDSM Test where you can take a quiz and it will tell you basically what type of things you are into. This website has always been a really great tool for me in my relationships where we will do this test and then compare results and see what we are into together, basically. So my test results are 99% submissive, 95% degradee, so enjoying being degraded, 91% boy girl, 91% rope bunny, 82% experimentalist, 73% age player, 72% exhibitionist, 62% switch, 61% owner, 61% rigger, 61% dominant, and 60% sadist. The rest of them are all under 50%, so I'm not going to go through the whole list. But yeah, that's basically what I'm into these days. So yeah, these days I really prefer being submissive in my personal sex life because I just want to have a fucking break and let somebody else do the work. I think I'm a very strong person in my life. I go after what I want. I'm always taking on new projects. I'm very busy. I'm very on top of things. I'm very much in control. So when I'm having sex in my personal life, I want to like lie back and let go of the control. Okay. I want someone else to do the work. I just want to enjoy it and not have to worry about anything. That's one of the things I love about being submissive is like literally just letting somebody else make all the decisions. Like I don't even have to think about my arms because you're going to hold them down and tell me where to put them. Okay. I just really enjoy being able to completely let go in that way. Obviously, when it's with somebody that I trust and feel a connection with. And yeah, just not having to worry about anything and just giving myself to that person. I love that feeling of giving myself and giving my power to somebody. On the other side of things, I haven't really been dominant since that one relationship that I talked about. Recently, I have kind of felt a desire to be dominant again, but being dominant is the opposite of being submissive, obviously, but it's also the opposite in the way of like I was just saying about I enjoy being submissive because I don't have to do any of the work or make any of the decisions. When you're the dominant one, you are doing the work and making the decisions, and that obviously has its own payoff. There's a reason people enjoy being dominant and making those decisions and having that control. But I kind of feel like right now in my life, I don't really want to be dominant unless I'm getting paid to do that work. Because it is extra work to be dominant, Like if I'm going to be doing all that shit for you, like I should be getting paid? So I do really have an interest in being dominant in my work life and with my clients, but nothing really extreme. I don't advertise myself as a pro dom in any way. I also don't have an interest really in being in any sort of 24/7 relationship ever again. I haven't had an interest in being submissive in a 24/7 relationship since I kind of had that revelation about my power all those years ago. Yeah, I'm just not interested in giving away that much of my power to somebody. I love giving away my power in set spaces in the bedroom for a set amount of time, but I don't feel any interest in doing power exchange beyond that on the submissive side. And with the dominant side, it's just, again, I don't have interest in doing that much work. I'm not interested in it enough to want to put in the work that a 24/7 power exchange requires. I also am still into DDLG, but not in the way that I used to be. This is one of those things that has changed for me. And I think the way that our kinks can change is so interesting. So big part of DDLG for me was always like the age play aspect of it. So like role playing as a younger age of myself than I actually am. And I used to enjoy age playing as like, oh, I don't know, maybe like between 6 and 10 years old, 8 and 10 years old. I don't know, something around there. I was never very specific with it. But in the past, like year or so, that has actually changed for me. And now I fantasize about age playing as a teenager. So it's almost like this part of myself that is inside of me that longs for this care that is expressed through my DDLG roleplay and fantasies has actually grown up. And I actually view it as like this part of myself healing. And I think it's super interesting. And again, this could be a whole episode in itself, like talking about why I have the kinks I do, why people in general have the kinks that we do, and how they relate to our inner psyche, especially when we're talking about age play, how it relates to our inner children. Because for me, this is super related to my inner child. I know that I'm not into this type of stuff just because I think it's hot, it definitely has a deeper psychological tie for me. So for me, this part of myself has grown up and now I'm interested in role playing as a teenager, not as a child. So yeah, that's super interesting. I will also say that like overall, I think I'm definitely less kinky than I used to be. I feel like I'm relatively vanilla, but what I think of as relatively vanilla, when some people hear about my sex life, they might think that what I do is super extreme. At the moment, I'm really interested in this level of like more passion and like romantic intensity as opposed to a more of a whole power exchange. Like these days, I really prefer being held down by my partner with their hands as opposed to being tied up with rope. For me, that's a really good example of how my preferences have changed because I enjoy that more kind of direct and intimate type of play. Not that using like rope is not direct or intimate, but it's that kind of direct sensual element of someone like using their body to do something with you as opposed to using external toys. Yeah, that's just kind of what I'm into, but I still am and I think always will be super into choking, that's been a mainstay for me and just generally feeling like I'm giving up my power to the person that I'm having sex with, as long as I trust them and feel that connection with them, which is super important to me. And that leads me to the type of things I do with clients because I am an escort, obviously, as you know. If you listen to this podcast, it's literally called The Whore's Bedroom. I don't know why I felt like I had to reiterate that. But yeah, I am relatively vanilla with clients. And this is because, like, I think especially these days for me, BDSM and power exchange, it's inherently emotional for me. And it's really important for me to be selective with who I do that with. So I am open to being submissive with clients, but I don't offer it ever from a first session. I am open to offering it with people that I have seen at least once before and people who I feel that type of connection with and I trust to participate in that power exchange with because trust is so crucial. And I'm not talking about anything extreme here. Like, I would never offer to be submissive in any types of extreme bondage or extreme pain play or anything like that with clients just because of the safety aspect. But for more gentle things like choking and like being held down and just kind of role playing with power exchange, I am open to doing that on a soft level with clients that I know and have developed a connection with. And on the other side of things, on the dominant side, like I said, I'm kind of interested in exploring my dominant side again and really interested in doing it with clients. But I don't advertise myself as a pro dom. I'm not really interested in doing anything super extreme. I could advertise myself as a pro dom if I wanted to, but I do enjoy the more vanilla stuff as well, which is why I advertise myself as a vanilla provider or as like a girlfriend experience provider. But yeah, I would like to experience doing sensual domination with clients, like doing more soft stuff. So hopefully that will happen in the future. If you are a potential client listening to this and you want to be sensually dominated, send me an email. And I think that is all for this episode. I'm super excited to dive into your guys' questions in the next episode. Like I said, you guys left so many good ones. I'm going to do that episode in the next few days, so keep an eye out for it. That means there's going to be 2 episodes this week before the next one. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. My name is Lucy Huxley. I'm a whore, and thank you for joining me in my bedroom.